Let's talk about this bill that's coming up here that's pressing and what it means. It's in front of the Supreme Court, I believe. So why don't you tell everybody,
Yeah.
Ron, exactly what it is and what's important and what people can do to try to affect this.
So there's two really big pressing things going on in the digital rights world right now. And the first one that you mentioned, so the Supreme Court is going to take up two cases. We don't know all of the ins and outs of these cases. It does have to do with a very sensitive topic. It's people using social media to plan violent acts, basically, which a friendly reminder to everybody, inciting violence is not protected speech. Just so everyone knows. Like that's not like there's not a free speech thing going on here. Inciting violence is not protected speech. The kind of red flag going on here is, depending on how they rule, this could really blow a hole in what's known as Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. Now, Section 230, there's a lot of people who kind of misrepresent what it actually is. What Section 230 is it's basically the piece of policy that preserves free speech online. More recently, people have called it the, quote, social media shield, which isn't entirely false. It is the legislation that shields social media companies from being held liable to what people post. There is some truth there. But Section 230 applies to everything on the internet. It applies to all users. It applies to you. It applies to me. It applies to personal websites. It applies to news articles. It applies to online classifieds. It applies to everything. So to say like, oh, it just applies to social media companies, no, it doesn't. It applies to everything, and it assures free speech online. So gutting Section 230 is not going to solve the problems we have with social media companies. It's going to make it worse. The better solution is to have new policy that meets the moment and is geared specifically towards social media companies without blowing a hole in a policy that's working. I mean, it's kind of like you could take the analogy of free speech. We have this idea of free speech, and it's a good thing. So when we needed to have other types of policies out there to meet the moment, we didn't end free speech. Instead, we had new policy that says, hey, free speech does not include defamation. If you defame somebody, that's against the law. You can't incite violence. That's against the law. That's what we did instead of just ending free speech. It's a similar like metaphor here, kind of, because it's like we shouldn't end 230. Instead, we should say, hey, social media juggernauts like Twitter and Facebook need to follow the free speech laws of the United States, or they need to have more transparency in the way they enact their terms and services. They can't have data collection, which I'm all for, better data privacy. So that's what's at stake here. So if the Supreme Court blows a hole in Section 230, we are all going to be so much more vulnerable online. You're never going to see what the next Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube is going to be, because Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube and Google are going to be juggernauts forever, because this is going to make sure no one can ever compete with them, because they're not going to have Section 230 protections. A small website's not going to be able to withstand a lawsuit. Facebook can. So that's what's at stake here. One thing people can do to start fighting back is you can go to a website called makedmssafe.com, which of course makedmsafe.com, but for ease of the URL, makedmssafe.com. That demands encryption of all of our messages across social media. Facebook shares private messages with police on a regular basis, usually to stop someone from obtaining abortion information in a post-Roe v. Wade society. So this is really important right now, because if they blow a hole in Section 230, all of a sudden, all of these platforms are really going to be on their toes, which means your messages are going to be even more vulnerable than they are now. So one of the ways we can fight back against what could potentially happen, because we're relying on the Supreme Court here. What are the chances that they're going to do something good? Mm-hmm. So makedmsafe.com.
All right. Make DM safe, folks. It's something you can do. It's an action you can take, and it's something you can do right now.